So, I recently dealt with something I never thought I'd say out loud. My property got raided by cops. And the reason? An HOA dispute. At least, that's what they wanted me to think it was. But when you've spent 20 years in the teams, operating in environments where the difference between a friendly and a hostile is a twitch of a finger, you learn to recognize when something doesn't smell right. And let me tell you, nothing about the black SUVs rolling up my gravel driveway smelled like lawful enforcement. Before we dive in, let me know where you're listening from today. Drop your state or country in the comments because I want to know how far this warning is reaching. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to want to check your own property lines. I bought this ranch for one reason, and one reason only: silence. After 2 decades of service, after the sand, the noise, the constant static of radio chatter in my ear, and the weight of knowing that every decision I made could cost a brother his life, I needed to unplug. I found 80 acres in the panhandle of Idaho, a place where the trees outnumbered the people by 1,000,000 to 1, and where the only governance I had to worry about was the changing of the seasons. I paid in cash, I built the perimeter fence myself, and I settled into a life that was supposed to be about fixing tractors and throwing the ball for my Malin. Rook, for the first 2 years, that's exactly what it was. It was heaven. It was the kind of freedom that you bleed for. The kind you dream about when you're sleeping in a hole in the ground halfway across the world. But then the letter showed up. It wasn't in the mailbox, because I don't have a mailbox at the gate. I have a P.O. box in town. No, this letter was taped to the front gate with blue painter's tape right over the no trespassing sign. It was on thick cream-colored cardstock, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. It read, "Welcome to the Whispering Pines Community Association. Please find enclosed your orientation packet and a schedule of fines for existing code violations." I laughed. I actually stood there in the gravel, the sun beating down on my neck, and I laughed out loud because my property was miles from the nearest subdivision. Whispering Pines didn't exist, at least not legally, not on any map I had ever seen. I crumbled the paper up, tossed it in the burn barrel, and went about my day, thinking it was just a scam or a mistake, a clerical error made by some overzealous developer 3 towns over. That was my first mistake. You don't ignore a probe, not in warfare and not in the suburbs. And I was about to learn that the line between the two was blurrier than I ever imagined. 3 days later, a drone appeared. It wasn't a hobbyist drone, not one of those little buzzing plastic toys kids get for Christmas. This was a commercial-grade quadcopter, matte black, quiet rotors, equipped with what looked like a high-resolution gimbal camera and, if my eyes weren't deceiving me, a LiDAR mapping unit. It hovered at exactly 400 feet, right at the legal limit, tracing the perimeter of my barn. Scanning my vehicle storage, hovering over my back porch, I watched it from the shadow of the garage, sipping my coffee, feeling that old familiar coil tightening in my gut, the one that tells you the environment has shifted from permissive to non-permissive. I didn't shoot it down, not yet. Rules of engagement matter, even here. I simply watched it, noted the flight path, and timed its battery life. It returned the way it came, disappearing over the ridgeline to the east. The next morning, there was another letter taped to the gate. This one was thicker. Second notice of violation. Unauthorized agricultural structures barn. Unauthorized biological assets canine. Failure to maintain aesthetic standards grass height. Total fines accrued $4,500. Immediate payment required to avoid escalation to Phase 2 compliance. Phase 2. The terminology stuck in my brain like a splinter. HOAs don't talk about Phase 2 compliance. Militaries do. I got in my truck and drove to the county clerk's office, needing to see the plat maps. I needed to know if I had somehow missed a massive rezoning effort. When I got there, the clerk, an old woman named Marge, who had known me since I bought the place, looked uneasy. She wouldn't meet my eyes. When I asked her about Whispering Pines, she lowered her voice, glancing around the empty office. "It's a new development, Alex," she whispered, her hands shaking as they adjusted her glasses. "They bought the 6,000 acres bordering the national forest. They filed the paperwork 3 months ago. It's unusual. Expedited by the state. They have some kind of special district status." "But my land isn't in it," I said, pointing to the map. "I'm grandfathered in. I'm independent." Marge hesitated, then slid a piece of paper across the counter, face down. "Just be careful, Alex. These people." They aren't like the usual developers. They have their own security. They have their own police. I took the paper. It was a photocopy of a statute, something buried deep in a legislative bill passed at midnight on a Friday, granting master-planned communities of a certain size the right to enforce aesthetic and safety standards on adjacent properties, deemed critical to the visual integrity of the district. It was a loophole, a seizure clause wrapped in bureaucratic jargon. I drove home with a pit in my stomach, the kind of rage that burns cold. They weren't just trying to find me. They were trying to annex me. When I got back to the ranch, the gate was open. The chain had been cut. My heart hammered against my ribs as I floored the truck, tires spinning in the gravel, flying up the driveway. I skidded to a halt in front of the house. Standing on my porch was a woman. She was tall, wearing a pristine beige pantsuit that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of the rugged mountains. She held a clipboard like a weapon. Flanking her were two men in gray tactical uniforms. They wore plate carriers, drop-leg holsters, and balaclavas, no badges. Just patches that read community compliance. My dog, Rook, was nowhere to be seen. I stepped out of the truck, my movement fluid, my hands empty but ready. "Get off my property," I said, my voice low, the kind of command voice that usually makes trainees freeze. The woman didn't flinch. She looked up from her clipboard, adjusting her sunglasses. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet condescension. "I'm Eleanor. I'm the president of the association. We're here because you failed to respond to our correspondence. We're conducting an asset audit to seize property equivalent to the unpaid fines." I said, "Get off my property," I repeated, stepping closer. The two men shifted, their hands hovering near their holsters. I scanned them instantly. Poor stance, equipment to new, looking at me with the arrogance of bullies who have never been punched in the mouth. "Where is my dog?" I asked. Eleanor sighed, as if I were a child. The animal was aggressive. Officer Miller had to neutralize the threat. He's been detained in the containment vehicle. My vision narrowed. The world turned into a tunnel. "Neutralize?" I asked, the word tasting like ash. "If you hurt my dog, God help me, I will burn your world down," I said through gritted teeth. One of the guards, the bigger one, stepped forward and shoved me. "Back off, sir. You are in violation of—" He didn't finish the sentence. Muscle memory is a terrifying thing. Before my conscious mind could process the decision, my left hand had batted his arm away. My right hand had seized his throat, and I had swept his leg, driving him into the dirt with the full weight of my body. I heard the wind leave his lungs in a wheeze. I ripped the sidearm from his holster, Glock 17. Fully loaded, and ejected the magazine, racking the slide to clear the chamber, tossing the round into the grass before throwing the gun toward the tree line. I stood up, staring at the second guard. He had his hand on his weapon, but he was shaking. He saw the look in my eyes. He saw the predator. "Don't," I said. He froze. Eleanor was screaming now, something about assault and lawsuits, but I ignored her. I walked to the black van parked near the barn. I could hear whining. I ripped the back doors open. Rook was there, in a cage, groggy, bleeding from a cut on his head, but alive. He had been tranquilized. I picked him up, carrying him out, and turned to Eleanor. "You have 5 minutes," I said. "If you are still here in 6, I will consider you hostile combatants on private soil, and I will defend this ranch with lethal force." The big guard wheezed his way into the van. Eleanor shrieked threats into her phone, and they peeled out, kicking up dust. I carried Rook inside, treated his wound. It was superficial. Thank God, and sat there as the adrenaline faded, replaced by the cold, calculating clarity of mission planning. This wasn't an HOA. You don't bring tranquilizers and plate carriers to a grass dispute. You don't cut chains. This was an operation. That night, I didn't sleep. I went into the basement, to the gun safe. I didn't pull out the hunting rifles. I pulled out the gear I kept for the collapse. The night vision, the thermal monocular, the suppressed carbine, the plate carrier with the level 4 ceramics. I transitioned from homeowner to operator. I needed intel. If they were playing by military rules, so would I. I waited 2 days. I let them think I was scared. Let them think I was hunkering down. I saw the drones again, more of them this time, flying in shifts. They were watching the house. But they weren't watching the creek bed that ran along the southern property line, the one that fed into the national forest. On the third night, under the cover of a new moon, I camouflaged up. Face paint, ghillie hood, scent blocker. I slipped out the back, crawling through the drainage ditch, moving with the slow, agonizing patience that gets drilled into you during Bud SI, moved 3 miles through the brush. Circling around to where the Whispering Pines development was being built, it was a fortress. The entrance was gated with a guard shack that looked more like a checkpoint in the green zone than a suburban entrance. There were cameras everywhere, but the construction trailers were in the back near the edge of the clearing. I moved like a ghost, timing the sweep of the spotlight. I reached the main trailer, the one with a satellite uplink on the roof. The lock was a joke. A simple rake pick opened it in 10 seconds. Inside, it smelled of stale coffee and ozone. I clicked on my Redlens tactical light and scanned them. My heart stopped. My ranch was on the map, but it wasn't labeled residential. It was labeled Node 4, Live Fire Testing, Displacement Protocol. I started rifling through the file cabinets. I found a binder labeled OPRM Phase 2. I opened it and started reading, and what I saw made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a development. It was a contract. A government contract awarded to a private defense firm disguised as a property management company. The HOA was a front for a sociological experiment on rural compliance and asset seizure in non-permissive environments. They weren't enforcing rules anymore. They were probing limits. Seeing how much pressure rural landowners could take before folding, displacement wasn't a side effect. It was the objective. We were the test subjects. I took out my phone and quietly photographed everything, every page, every margin note, budget identifiers, zoning approvals, the signatures of the officials who greenlit it, a full tactical layout of something labeled the enforcement unit. And then I saw I-10 operational directive marked Phase 4. Execution time, 0300 hours. The language was cold and clinical. Full spectrum control, mandatory removal of subject Mercer, asset confiscation, mitigation of biological variables. They were coming to take the ranch tonight, and they were going to kill Rook. I slipped out of the trailer, leaving everything exactly as I found it. I had 3 hours to turn my 80 acres into a nightmare. CI ran back, not caring about the noise as much now, pushing my cardio to the limit. When I got back to the ranch, I woke Rook up. "Game time, buddy," I whispered. I moved him to the safe room in the basement, the one reinforced with poured concrete and a steel door I'd installed years ago just in case. Then I went to work. I didn't have claymores, but I had flashbangs I'd legally acquired for training, and I had 12-gauge shells loaded with rock salt and beanbags. I had high-intensity I had a directional LRAD siren I'd bought surplus and never thought I'd actually use. I set the perimeter deliberately, methodically, the way you do when the clock is ticking and mistakes get people killed. Fishing line became tripwires, connected to chem lights and vibration buzzers. I positioned the strobes at eye level in the kill zones, the choke points of the driveway and the front porch. I soaked the concrete in front of the porch with water. It was freezing out, and by 0300, that slab would be a sheet of black ice. Subtle advantages matter. I took up my position on the roof of the barn, wrapped in a thermal blanket to mask my heat signature. Rifle-braced optics dialed. I waited. The silence of the ranch was heavy, pregnant with violence. At 0258, the outer perimeter tripped. A silent vibration on my watch. They were here. I looked through the thermal scope. 6 heat signatures, moving in a diamond formation, professional enough to be dangerous, sloppy enough to underestimate the terrain. They weren't using the tree line. They were walking straight up the driveway, assuming I was asleep, assuming I was just another rural landowner who would fold when confronted by authority-looking uniforms. They reached the inner gate. The leader signaled. 2 peeled off toward the back of the house. For advanced on the porch, battering ram. Zip ties, no warrants, no hesitation. They weren't here to talk. The point man stepped onto the porch and immediately lost his footing. His boots shot out from under him, arms windmilling as he slammed into the railing. The sound cracked through the night. "Breach, breach," someone hissed. I triggered the strobes. The porch erupted in violent, pulsing white light, flashing at a frequency designed to disorient, induce vertigo, and overwhelm the senses. At the same moment, the LRAD screamed to life, a piercing, skull-splitting wail that cut straight through bone and thought. They panicked. They were blinded, deafened, slipping on ice, shouting over each other, firing blind rounds into the air in pure reflex. I didn't return fire with lethal rounds. I didn't need to. I racked the 12-gauge thump. The leader took a beanbag square to the chest plate, the impact knocking the air from his lungs and sending him tumbling backward into the mud. Thump, thought the second man caught one in the thigh. He went down hard, screaming. The two at the back door came sprinting around the corner, straight into the tripwire. The flashbang detonated at their feet. The concussive blast rattled the windows, the sound rolling across the trees. They dropped instantly, hands clamped over their ears. Rolling in the dirt, I rappelled off the barn, boots hitting the ground already moving. I flowed through the smoke and chaos like muscle. Memory had been waiting years for this moment. Zip ties. 1, 2, 3, 4. I secured them quickly, efficiently, dragging them into a pile in the center of the driveway. When I pulled the masks off, I saw what I expected. Young faces, terrified eyes, mercenaries, kids playing soldier for a paycheck. They didn't understand. I found Eleanor in the command vehicle at the gate. She had locked the doors when the lights and siren went off. I shattered the driver's side window with the butt of my rifle and hauled her out by the collar. She was screaming now, sobbing, shouting that she was a federal agent, that I had no idea how much trouble I was in. "You're not an agent?" I growled, dragging her toward the pile. "You're a test subject, and you just failed." I called the sheriff, not the local deputy, the sheriff himself, Langston, a man I knew from the VFW, a man who distrusted federal contractors on principle. "Sheriff," I said when he answered, "I have 6 armed intruders secured on my property. Tactical gear, no badges. Documents you'll want to see." He was there in 20 minutes with 4 cruisers. He took one look at the driveway, the zip-tied men, the strobes still flashing, the LRAD humming end, then at the paperwork I handed him. "Jesus, Alex, what the hell is this?" "Proof," I said. "They're trying to privatize martial law." Sheriff Langston's deputies separated the men, read them their rights, confiscated their weapons, and loaded them into the cruisers. Eleanor didn't stop talking the entire time. Threats, legal jargon, federal acronyms, meant to intimidate men who'd heard it all. Before, Langston ignored her. He took the documents I'd pulled from the trailer and spread them across the hood of his cruiser under the flashing lights. Funding codes, contractor IDs, jurisdictional loopholes, operational language that had no place anywhere near a homeowners association. "This isn't zoning enforcement," he said finally. "This is a black budget operation." "Yeah," I said. And I was the test case. By sunrise, the story was already leaking. I didn't wait for permission. I uploaded everything, every photo, every document, every operational order to watchdog forums, independent journalists, encrypted mirrors, and public archives. If there was one thing I learned in the teams, it was this: sunlight kills operations faster than bullets. By noon, Project Oprem was trending. By evening, the Whispering Pines development was temporarily suspended. By the next morning, it no longer existed. The shell corporation behind it, Veridian Dynamics, dissolved overnight. Website gone. Phone numbers disconnected. Executives unreachable. The state issued statements claiming they'd been misled by third-party contractors. The Attorney General announced an investigation and promised transparency. I'd heard those promises before. The men were charged with armed trespass, assault, unlawful detention, and attempted kidnapping. Eleanor was indicted for conspiracy and impersonation. Whether that went anywhere was out of my hands, but the operation was burned. Public, toxic. Neighbors started coming by. People who'd avoided eye contact for years suddenly wanted to talk. Ranchers, farmers, retirees, all asking the same questions. How do we stop this? How do we protect our land? What would you do if it happened again? I told them the truth. Don't ignore the first letter. For a while, things were quiet again. The drones disappeared. The road traffic dropped. The ranch went back to being what it was supposed to be: wind in the trees, stars at night, a dog sleeping at my feet. Then, 2 weeks later, I got an email. It was encrypted. I hadn't used that key since my service days. But muscle memory doesn't fade. I decrypted it in seconds. No sender, no header, no signature, just one message. Phase 2 in Idaho terminated. Data collection complete. Subject Mercer provided valuable resistance metrics. Moving to beta site, Midwest. Thank you for your participation. I stared at the screen for a long time. They hadn't lost, they had learned. They'd tested how a rural landowner would react. They'd tested escalation thresholds. They'd tested resistance against a Tier 1 operator, and now they were moving on better prepared. Didn't stop them. I trained them. So if you're listening to this in the Midwest store, anywhere else you see a new HOA pop-up where it shouldn't. If you see drones over land that's been quiet for generations. If you get letters about fines from an association you never joined. Don't laugh. Don't ignore it. Don't throw it in the burn barrel. Reinforce your doors. Check your property lines. Watch your animals, because they're coming. And next time, they won't send a small team. I'm still here. Still watching the perimeter. Still waiting, because now I know what they are. And next time, there won't be zip ties. Next time, the resistance won't be a test. It'll be a war. Stay safe. Watch your 6. Mercer out.